let's get into a panel discussion surrounding entrepreneurs and having social impact. Let me please introduce Deborah Rue, founder and CEO of Rue Global Impact, who will introduce the rest of her panel. Take it away, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you for the introduction. And I see my panel are all online. So, and welcome to the panelists and WITI. Thank you so much for this conversation. I loved the conversation that Noelle and Heather were having before, because it really is very timely to the conversation that we're going to have about making sure everyone's included from an entrepreneurial level. So I want to briefly, I'm just going to briefly introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to give them a few minutes to introduce themselves. I think it's always hard to sit and listen to our bios. So I like to let the audience, I like to let the speakers speak for themselves. So our first panelist is Betsy Bluestone, and she's the Senior Director of Global Scouting and Partnerships at Procter & Gamble Ventures. And then next we have Dennis Gorda, who is the founder and CEO and executive chairman of Zutium and Open Business Council. I'll let him tell you more about that. And then Jordan Sanders is the CEO and founder of the Resource Key. So let's start with you, Betsy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. My job is in P&G Ventures, which is really kind of an innovation stream within Procter & Gamble. It is our job to build businesses in categories where P&G doesn't already exist, which means we're very dependent on technology and capability coming from the outside world. We're working in areas where I guess you wouldn't necessarily say were our core competencies. And so it's a lot of bringing together the best of the startup with the best of the big corporation. And I have been at Procter for a little over 30 years and have worked in nearly every business unit. I think this one might just be my favorite.
Wow, so she started when she was 3, but
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
A lot of time in skincare.
That's right. Dennis, you want to go next?
Yeah, with pleasure. So thank you so much for having me, Deborah, and the WITI network. It's a pleasure. Actually, I worked with Procter & Gamble a long time ago, so it's funny to be here right now with you, Betsy. So I'm a serial entrepreneur and author, so I write books, and I try to research a lot of the things we discuss in these panels and in this conference, especially about the future of society. And my next book is about Society 5.0, Magna Carta, that is precisely how to look at this in a more humanity perspective. As a serial entrepreneur, I'm behind a couple of companies and platforms. So the major platforms I'm leading is openbusinesscouncil.org. That is a platform focused on creating digital footprint for business worldwide. So using blockchain and AI technology to make sure that when you look at a company, making sure the company exists and the founders exist. And as well, creating an algorithm that looks at the companies from the perspective of sustainable development goals and digital inclusion, a lot of things we're discussing here. And then the other platform I'm quite involved as well is citiesabc.com, that does a bit the same as Open Business Council, but for cities. And we're working to try to make the world a better place, and at the same time, looking at the idea of social impact and business together and learning every day. That's about me, and I do a lot of stuff.
And we appreciate that you do so much. Jordan, tell us about you.
Hi, my name is Jordan Saunders. My pronouns are she, her. My visual description is I'm a Black woman. I have my hair in a high bun. I'm wearing a teal dress with a gold necklace with a lock and key. I'm sitting in an orange and white geometric chair with a background of a blue and gold painting. Thank you so much for having me, and welcome everyone. I have been a speech language pathologist for the past 10 years. I transitioned to starting my own inclusive digital agency after years of listening to children and adults with different types of disabilities discussing the lack of feeling included in the community. And so I ventured out and started my own agency, and now I specifically work in the area of educating and making sure that companies are being inclusive and accessible through social media, as well as working with businesses and creative projects to ensure people with disabilities are included in making meaningful connections with brands. And we do that in a lot of different ways. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so you see, we have an amazing panel of very, very talented individuals. So we're going to just go around. We're not going to do presentations. We wanted to really have an interactive session. So I'm going to start with you, Betsy. Can you give us some general tips for entrepreneurs that are trying to grow their businesses?
Yeah, I'll tell you that we see so many entrepreneurs who have started a business but get stuck in the next stage, kind of moving it forward. And so I think, that just laser focus on the problem that you are trying to solve. What is the job to be done either for the consumer or for your customer? And really focusing on that seems to be the thing that propels businesses forward, startups forward. I think the other thing that is really interesting, and we'll talk a lot about this, I think, throughout the course of this conversation, and the challenges in getting funding and really being strategic about that. So we spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs talking about sources of funding based on the stage that you're in, the objectives that you have for your company. And so I guess that kind of boils down to finding mentors, really mentors from different walks of life, different businesses, different perspectives, to help guide you in how you think about the future of your business and how to move it forward. Sometimes I often tell people that you really do have to start with the end in mind. It's the old adage, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And so if you want to exit, starting to really go to school and study those businesses that are potential exits for you, figuring out what they're looking for, what's their sort of special recipe for being interested in a business. And those are the things that can really help hone your focus once you've really developed something that solves the job to be done.
Yeah, really good points. I know that when I first became an entrepreneur, I was in the banking industry. And it is the hardest job I've ever had. It is so hard. Those late nights where you're worried about cash flow and how are you going to pay your team, but at the same time, I remember I would have entrepreneurs coming to me, and I would say, "Well, what do you do? Well, what do you need done?" And that's not the right answer. You really got to stay in your lane. You got to know what you're working on. And, you can be like Dennis, you can be, a serial entrepreneur, but it's really important to stay in your lane, especially when you're dealing with large corporations, because the large corporations often worry sometimes about dealing with us smaller entrepreneurs. They're almost afraid they'll crush us so there's so many different there's so many different points. And that's why it's really, I appreciate Procter & Gamble being in there to support entrepreneurs. So Dennis, why is it important for entrepreneurs to support other entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it's a very good question and a very important thing. So I think at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is about creating an ecosystem. And any business success is about your capacity to build a network of people that can support you, both as partners, both as mentors, as Betsy mentioned. And I think that is very important, the mentorship. I think actually I became more obsessed about the mentorship as I get older. But I think one of the things that I feel that is very important is we are going to, and I want to touch this because I think it's a critical element, is then we're getting a very complex world where we have, I think, 3 layers of complexity. One is big corporations that somehow have more power than ever in history. Second, we have the future or present of work, that is AI taking over everything in a lot of ways. And it's really getting, and this is very micro AI, so imagine the next couple of years. And then the other end is that everyone is becoming an entrepreneur, whatever you want it or not. And I think these 3 layers are very complex to manage because the schools are not preparing for the 3rd layer. Because in the end of the day, all of us here have our own brands, and our brands, of course, Betsy, you're behind a big corporation worldwide. But the challenge is that how these corporations can actually, first of all, be sustainable and creating social impact. but at the same time, how the rest of society can actually leverage that in a nice way. And this is the biggest complexity that I'm seeing right now, because entrepreneurs, I think everyone has to be an entrepreneur. I would say if someone that is listening to us is not an entrepreneur, please think seriously, whatever you're working for, a big corporation or not, because the way things are going, it's that your brand, even within a corporation, is your main differentiator. And I'll just use a small example. For us, this week I was looking at an AI tool, and I just researched because I was struggling to find in my team and actually our partners someone to do a couple of designs that I could not do it. And I just found this search, small AI tool. I pay like £250 per year, or in dollars is around $300. And the thing is that I managed to get in the space of 10 minutes more work than all my team in 2 weeks. And I think this is the key element that you're facing right now as entrepreneurs and as people, is that as entrepreneurs, this kind of tools are going to disrupt 5, 6, 7 people as we speak. So that means me working with other entrepreneurs, and coming back to the basis of your question, Deborah, is that is going to be the differentiator. I can learn with you, Deborah. I can learn with you, Jordan, or you, Betsy. And this is going to be the main differentiator, because if I build this ecosystem, my business can actually create, first of all, I can create a revenue stream, or at least create, if the business goes up or down, that it can help each other. Then it comes the mentorship, it comes learning with each other. And I think creating this kind of social drive impact that I think is key, because I think with all the digital technologies, and especially with COVID-19, we are all a bit blurred on this, that family life, professional life, everything is mixed. And of course, I'm very blessed because I have a big house. I can go in my room and be, but I see a lot of people that have to share with children, with everything else. And I have as well, but I am a bit more blessed on that level, but it's very complex. So having this entrepreneur network makes a big difference. It makes a difference from financial and strategical level, from as well a network of support, and as well from a network of creating learning and education, which is the biggest element for entrepreneurship, is the resilience, because entrepreneurship is about persistence, resilience, and the capacity to create something. And of course, most of the people fail because they're not prepared for that. And I'm actually very worried for my children, for all of us, because I think, like was mentioned in the previous panel, AI is there and it's really disrupting everything, whether we wanted it or not. But I think in the end of the day, it has to be built for us, not against us. And I build AI tools and I get scared what we can do. But at the same time, I'm struggling sometimes to pass the knowledge that I have to my teams. And this is where the network of entrepreneurs to finish are critical for everything we're doing.
Yeah, well said. And I forgot to introduce myself. I was so busy introducing the panelists, but I am the CEO of RU Global Impact. And what we do is we work with large multinational corporations to make sure people with disabilities are being meaningfully included. And I have a grown daughter. She's 34 years old, that was born with Down syndrome. And it was really sad when she was born, because I thought she was this perfect, which she was, perfect baby girl, but the reactions of my community were like, oh, it's such a tragedy. My daughter's life is not a tragedy. She's actually, she adds great value in the world. But I'm also the chairman of a brand new organization that we created called Billion Strong, where we want to bring together the 1.3 billion people with disabilities in the world and really talk about identity and support each other. As Dennis said, we've all got to support each other. So if the community of people with disabilities came together in force, we could really, really support each other and support our allies and our accomplices and all the intersectionalities. So it's just I think it's collaborating, supporting each other, applauding brands like Procter & Gamble that are supporting the world to be a better place. All of that is really good. So Jordan, why did you want to become an entrepreneur, and what can you recommend to other diverse young people that want to go into business for themselves?
So for me, I definitely think, the biggest thing is how much of a forward thinker I think I am, and how I've built relationships, and I've really taken the time to listen over the years to whoever I was interacting with. So the biggest thing for me is when the change that I wanted to see happening wasn't happening. So I wanted to create that. And so I stepped outside of direct therapy and started my own business. So really just saw something that I wanted to change. I'm very much forward thinking, and I think it's super important, especially in the times that we're in, to always be looking ahead of what's happening, because things are accelerating they were already accelerating at a fast rate, but COVID happened and now it's accelerating even more, to the point where one of the biggest things that I've always been very good and very diligent about is building relationships. Yes, it's important to close deals and things like that for your business to be successful, but building relationships, and not only building relationships within industries, but building outside of industries as well, because more and more, as we see just even with COVID, a lot of things are overlapping. So, food tech, or even in speech therapy, with the speech pathology industry, you saw like now everything's online, and the technology pieces. And so it's shifting the way that we're doing things. And, I think that's just super important to keep in mind, especially with something that I've kept in mind too, is building, and not only building within, but building outside as well, so that things are more interconnected and you don't have to feel like you have to do it all. Because I think that's the biggest thing, is like a lot with entrepreneurship is so many different moving pieces. And, when you're starting out, I think that is why, like Betsy had stated, with mentorship, and knowing how to talk about yourself, your personal brand. Like, if you can't brag or like tell someone about like the work that you're doing and why it's impactful, why your business is important, I think that's super important, especially as a young entrepreneur, is always being in touch with your personal brand, no matter how much it shifts. And I think that's going to be even more important, because it's no longer, okay, let me, fill out this application and then I have these credentials. It's like, why is it that you are a good fit for this position or not? And I think something that's not going to change, job can come and go, but if you have your personal brand, it can shift anytime, and it's something that always stays with you. So for young entrepreneurs, I would definitely just encourage building relationships, and having leaders that are in the space that you seek to go, no matter if that shifts or not, and aligning and connecting and bridging, and then accelerating. And I say accelerate because once you figure it out, it's time to move, because there's not a lot of room anymore for just to kind of say, oh, let me think about it. You have to accelerate, unless, or you get left behind, or something else is changing and you're disconnected with whatever it may be.
Yeah, well said. And I would just point out that you can be an entrepreneur and work in a corporation. I remember in the banking industry, I always felt I was an entrepreneur, and I took a lot of pride in my work and making sure that I supported the brands I worked in. I know Betsy can tell us a lot about that, but Betsy, how can big corporations partner with startups to spur disruptive innovation?
Well, I can speak. I think there's a lot of different models out there. So I'll speak to what we're doing at P&G and within our ventures space. I think, one of the things, being self-aware, right? One of the things that P&G is really good at is what we would say is sort of like incremental innovation, right? So what's the next best version of Tide, or the next, how do we take Pampers to the next level? That's innovation that we really excel at. But we're not necessarily, and I think this is true of a lot of big corporations, we're not necessarily, our DNA is not disruptive innovation. And so our journey really started with seeing that there was all of this innovation that was happening outside of the company, and figuring out, how do we do that without suffocating? How do we work with startups, with small brands or small businesses, or technologies coming out of university labs or federal labs, or there's all types of entrepreneurs out there. Two women or two guys in a garage. It takes all different forms. But as we started to look at, kind of where was all of the heat, where was disruptive innovation happening, we realized that we needed to figure out a model that allowed us to be a part of that. And I guess the good news is that as much as we lacked some of the core attributes that make us good disruptive innovators like agility and speed, is that there are things that entrepreneurs lack, like resources and capabilities, and so what we aimed to do was really create a business model that eliminated the trade-offs, that you could work with a big corporation without just this cumbersome bureaucracy, that we could give you the assets that you need to accelerate your business, right? To give you those things that you needed, whether that's consumer understanding or supply chain or distribution or manufacturing or whatever it is, the stage that you're at. How do we help you get to the next stage, and do that in a way that is not dilutive, but helps us figure out if we want to be in that business? So the idea really is to, with 180 years of experience as a big company, how do we reinvent ourselves by bringing in the best of the outside and doing that in a way that enables them to thrive and us to thrive without suffocating? So it's really, I think, an interesting time in corporate innovation, and for me, that bringing the outside in, or pairing the best of the corporation with the best of the startup, is really exhilarating space to work in.
I bet it would be, I get off mute, but I think it would be so interesting. I was surprised when I became an entrepreneur, because I became an entrepreneur because I wanted to have impact. And I deliberately became a for-profit entrepreneur. And I'll tell you, it has been really, really hard for years and years. And then I created a nonprofit along with Dr. Lamadre Pugh, who's going to be on tomorrow. And all of a sudden the money's flowing in. But at the same time, I think we need to support social entrepreneurs. But I feel that along my journey of 20 years, corporations like Procter & Gamble have been very supportive of what I was doing. There are some that don't seem to understand smaller entrepreneurs, and they want us to wait, 6 months to get paid, which is
right.
Kind of low. Yeah, it gets intense. But and there, what I would definitely recommend to any entrepreneur is, don't let anybody tell you can't do it. Don't let anybody tell you. I was told that if I did not have a white male CEO running my company in Virginia, I would never be successful. That just made me so darn determined to be successful. And so there's just so many things that we have to do to support each other, and we appreciate brands like Procter & Gamble supporting us.
The learning there is to choose wisely.
Yeah.
Right. And I made that comment. One of the first things I said when we started here was, go to school on the companies that you might be interested in partnering with, or who might be a potential exit. And if you do your homework, you will discover those that are going to be receptive, right? There's lots of places to go to build your business, and you don't have to do it someplace where they don't have the same ideals.
Oh, well said. Well said. I once went into a corporation, and I could tell they just had no interest in including people with disabilities. And so I ended the meeting, and my salesperson was like, "Why did you end it?" I said, "Because I'm not going to waste my breath on somebody that doesn't get it." So, all right. So Dennis, tell us about your efforts to support entrepreneurs in developing countries, and how can big corporations continue, like Betsy's talking about, supporting multinationals, entrepreneurs throughout their global footprint? Because one thing I always say to the clients we work with, don't just include, for example, people with disabilities in your US offices. If you are a global brand, we expect you to do it in every part of your geographic footprint. Over to you, Dennis.
Yeah, it's a big complexity. First of all, right now, looking at what is emerging countries and not emerging countries, because we have different velocities. And for instance, around 60% of the world population is based in 60 cities around the world. So it's macro cities around the world that are having most of the entrepreneurial and most of the business. But I think one of the things, I use an example that happened with me a couple of years ago, that I was invited to do a project in Africa. And to be honest, I was very reluctantly, because I look at the entry in Wikipedia of the country and I got afraid. And I was really, okay, no, I'm not going to do. But it was someone that I was teaching in a business school. It was someone that actually, he was my student. And I could not say no probably to a student that I really did more work. And I decided to do something and go. And after actually 1 year of research and negotiation, I decided to go to the country. And when I went to the country, first of all, of course, it's very different from what we have in Wikipedia. But if you go to Africa and in some of these locations, you might be a bit scared, or any place in the world. If you go to Latin America, stuff like that. And what happened is that the first time I went there, I was invited to speak in an event, and there was a lot of entrepreneurial people, some media, and I pushed the idea of creating a fintech and a technology education around in the country. And what happened is that, to my surprise, although the project was not as successful that I would like, what I understood is that I created a small wave because of the way I push the people in that leadership event and a lot of other things related. And immediately that created the kind of a movement in the country. So it created a network of startups, a network of fintech and technology startups, and it's still going on now. And what I've been finding out is that a lot of these things, so education is the critical element, and the irony right now is that everyone has access to internet. But the challenge is how you do this within the circumstances. So a lot of the work I'm doing is really more and more focused on education and coaching. And Betsy mentioned one thing about mentoring. And I think it's really, I feel more and more on that level, both me as well, because as I get bigger as a CEO and I get more network, I need to learn, because there are things you only learn with other peers, with other relationships. So it comes back to what you asked, Deborah, in terms of network of entrepreneurs, but as well the education. So I think definitely the work I've been doing both in Africa, in Asia, is a lot of education. And one of the things that excites me a lot is because I remember that I did a conference in Vietnam. It was the first time I went to Vietnam, and I was very excited because I was the keynote speaker in an event with the head of the central government, central bank, and so forth. And then after that, I had a couple of CEOs and other people that came to me. I like your conference. Would you like to collaborate with us? We are a small organization here in Vietnam, and we would like for you to consult us or help us. And then I asked, okay, how much is the number of clients or your network? It's just 10 million. And I was, okay, 10 million people is not a small network. But this shows as well the scalability that you have both in these emerging countries that for me are not emergent at all, because you have the same problems. If you go to sometimes to San Francisco and you see the problems with the homelessness, you probably would think in some neighborhoods that you are in Africa or in other, and actually in Africa you have actually more hope and something. So I don't look so much between countries, because I think all countries have challenges, and look at Europe, what has been happening as well. For instance, if you look at the challenge, I'm partly French, and I see a lot of things in France that get me very scared as well. So I think the challenge are the same all over the world, but education, the way you look at technology, of course, emerging countries have much more. I think the main challenge is infrastructure. And this part of infrastructure is a big challenge, because we have normally an elite that controls the country that normally has a lot of issues. And then most of the population is 20 years old and things like that. And I think the challenge is how you're going to be building this kind of layers between the young population that is 20 something, that are very young, very full of energy, and then the elite that normally is on the 60s, 70s and more, and they don't really understand. And I think it's this kind of challenge that we're going to be facing. And as well on the technology. So a lot of the work I do is really demystifying and creating both platforms or networks that actually tackle this. And for instance, your network, Deborah, of the Billion Strong, it's something that I love a lot. But for instance, even me, that I'm the son of someone with disability, I never realized that is 1.3 billion people with disabilities in the world. And this kind of challenge made me reverse engineer all my way, because I've been always entrepreneur, and my father, although is disabled, has been showing me, he never complained. Of course, he has the office use that are much bigger than anyone else, but I respect him more and more as an entrepreneur, because even if he's successful in a micro level, what he achieved, for me, it makes all my respect. But I think what I understood is as well, this is kind of we have right now a very kind of opportunity in the world. We have this technology that is amazing, and a lot of young people, because most of the world population is 20 something. So I think this level of education, this level of coaching and mentorship can make a big difference. And I really believe, especially with all the dysfunctionality that is happening on technology, and like sometimes if you look at the news, you think we are in the end of the world, but we are in the best time of the history of humanity, if you take out the climate change issues. So I think we can change a lot just in events like this. And I think that's a lot what I do is go for events, look at people. Sometimes I might have some surprises not so good. I remember to go to some event that I got a bit lost, but at the same time, most of the things what I see is great people, and I learn a lot. And to be honest, for me, just finishing is I went to in one of the countries in Africa. I was taken to a very remote place, and I was building a very advanced technology. And then I understood that, for instance, all the fishermen we're using WhatsApp to make all the sales between the sea and the rest of the country. And I see, okay, even in a country that has only 2G and all this stuff, they are using all these technologies. So it made me rethink as well, and actually be very hopeful, because it's so easy sometimes to make a massive difference, but it starts with all of us here. So I think that's part of my work on this.
I agree. And we are out of time, but we have time to, we're going to ask Jordan one more question. And also Connie has put a question in, which is, what is step one of disruptive innovation? Which I think is a great question. And I don't know if you want to answer that, Jordan, while I also ask you, what are some pros and cons of your entrepreneurial journey? And once again, if you wanted to answer Connie's question of what is step one of the disruptive innovation, and we only have like 3 or 4 minutes, and I had a bunch more questions, but that's okay. So let me turn it over to you, Jordan.
Okay, so may I ask if I can just, since we're rounding up and just to kind of pull it together, can I answer about like social impact, maybe a takeaway? Okay.
Absolutely.
And it may kind of hit on what the question was too. So one of the things that when we're talking about social impact, so it goes back to something very basic. If one of my examples is, it's like when I'm driving and I slow down and I'm intentionally letting someone go in front of me that's at a stop sign. And true story, I'm going to get coffee. The closest coffee shop is right ahead. The same person actually that I let in front of me goes into the coffee shop and says, you know what, I wanted to thank you for letting me go in front of you. May I buy you a cup of coffee? And I'm like, okay, sure. Lo and behold, this person goes there every day and introduces me to the owner. And I'm bringing this up because sometimes when we think of social impact, we think of it always maybe on a larger scale, but that to me is social impact. So fast forward maybe a year later, still support that local business. Sometimes I see that individual. And I think that's where we have to start, I think, because that is sustainable. The big things are just as great, but I think when we're talking about any type of disruption too, it has to be not only the disruption part is important, but the sustainability of what the disruption is that we're innovating. And I think that's going to be really important as we move forward in the future of looking at the smaller things just like that we can do every day that have a ripple effect.
Ooh, that's so beautiful. I remember paying the other day for coffee for the meal behind me. And I just got so much delight out of doing it. And then the driver got so much delight. And I thought, oh, this is what we do. It's the small can lead to the big impact. So I know we're out of time, but thank you, Betsy, and thank you for Procter & Gamble for caring about us and wanting to make the world a better place. Dennis, I love the work you do. So proud to partner with you. And Jordan, you stood out. That's why I noticed you. And I actually interviewed her on my show, Human Potential at Work, because she's a bright, bright entrepreneur that has a lot of potential. So thank you, WITI. Thank you, David. And thank you, Peggy, and everybody. We appreciate you. And we'll let you go on to the next speakers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.